On that sultry afternoon, the playground seemed too empty for a place where laughter used to fill the air. The swings swayed on their own, pushed by a restless wind that didn't provide any refreshment, only carried something strange through the atmosphere. A sensation hard to explain, as if time were waiting for something to happen. And it was in this strange atmosphere, amidst slides worn from use and dry sand accumulated in the corners, that a boy silently noticed something out of place. A backpack, small and torn, forgotten in the farthest corner of the playground, near the wall that separated the space from the dense trees around it. It seemed abandoned, forgotten, but there was something about it that held attention, as if the object carried too much weight to be merely a lost item. He approached slowly, with the instinct of someone who learned early on to distrust appearances. There was no one around, no guardian calling, no child nearby saying they'd forgotten. When he unzipped the zipper, he found no notebooks or toys, but something that made the world around him lose its sound for a moment. A detail so disturbing that even without fully understanding it, he knew he couldn't ignore it. Within minutes, the square was a target for sirens. Police arrived quickly, cordoned off the area, and called for reinforcements. What was in that backpack not only mobilized an entire team, but also unearthed a secret no one imagined was so close. And it all started with a boy who didn't run away when he saw something strange, who didn't turn his face away. Because sometimes what changes an entire city isn't what's screaming, but what's silently waiting to be discovered. But who was this boy the world insisted on ignoring, and who now became the central piece in a deadly puzzle? If this story captivated you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss the next exciting stories. Jaden Brooks was only 11 years old, but his dark eyes held an unusual depth for someone his age, reflecting curiosity and a quiet melancholy, as if he'd already learned that the world rarely listened to boys like him. Living in a small apartment in Brooklyn, he shared his routine with his hard-working mother, Denise, who worked double shifts between a restaurant and a hospital. His father had disappeared when Jaden was still a baby, leaving only old photographs that his mother discreetly kept. His life was marked by simplicity and solitude. He spent hours drawing in worn notebooks, creating adventures he dreamed of experiencing. He observed details that almost no one else noticed: neighbors, behaviors, strange cars that passed and disappeared. This attentive eye, though natural to him, drew ridicule at school, where classmates called him a fake detective. Jaden was quiet in class, and teachers recognized his intelligence but complained about his lack of participation. Every attempt to speak was met with impatience, which made him withdraw even further, learning that observing in silence was safer than risking humiliation. Despite his mother's overwhelm, there was tenderness in their relationship. Denise prepared little surprises for him, even when tired, and Jaden understood her lack of mindfulness, silently nurturing the desire to one day prove his worth, not only to her, but to everyone who underestimated him. The neighborhood playground was his refuge. Among rusty swings and worn-out toys, he daydreamed while other children played. Noisily, it was in this seemingly ordinary space that his story would take shape. One ordinary afternoon, while everyone else was distracted, Jaden noticed the first sign that something wasn't right. A detail that escaped the attention of adults, paving the way for a journey that would forever transform his life and the lives of those around him. And it was precisely in that playground, amidst children's laughter and unpretentious games, that Jaden noticed the first sign that something was not right. It was an autumn afternoon in Brooklyn, the sky tinged with orange hues reflected in the windows of the buildings and in the puddles of water scattered across the playground. Children ran back and forth, some competing to see who could reach the highest point on the swing, others sliding down repeatedly as if it were the greatest spectacle in the world. Amidst laughter, screams and hurried footsteps, everything seemed ordinary except for Jaden Brooks, who sat on the slide, watching. Silently, as he always did, he didn't participate in the loudest games, but he found in the habit of observing a sense of control, as if every detail were a piece of a puzzle invisible only to him. It was then that his eyes caught sight of something unusual. Beneath the slide, leaning against the damp sand, lay a worn, seemingly forgotten grey backpack. It wasn't uncommon to find abandoned toys or even old clothes left behind, but this backpack had something distinctive about it. It was partially open, as if it had been dropped in a hurry, and its weight seemed uneven, creating a strange, eye-catching curve. Jaden looked around, expecting someone to return to pick it up, but no one seemed to notice. Mothers chatted distractedly on nearby benches. Fathers arriving from work stopped by to pick up their children, and schoolmates ran off without even noticing. It was as if the backpack was invisible to everyone but him. Jaden's heart raced. With each passing minute, he felt as if he were standing in front of something that shouldn't be there. He tried to convince himself it was just a forgotten backpack, but the uneasiness wouldn't go away. The fact that it was misplaced, almost as if it had been hidden in a hurry, awakened a sense of alarm in him, and that feeling in Jaden was never in vain. Slowly rising, he took a few steps toward the slide. The voices around him seemed to grow distant, as if the world had lowered its volume only to amplify the sound of his breathing. With each step, a mixture of curiosity and fear washed over him. He didn't know what he would find, but there was something in his instinct that told him he needed to look closer. As he approached, the cold breeze blew dry leaves across the ground, creating a sound that further heightened the air of mystery. He cautiously extended his hand, hesitating for a few seconds. Part of him wanted to turn away and pretend nothing was happening, but another, stronger part whispered that something important was hidden there, waiting to be discovered. Jaden took a deep breath, and the instant his fingers touched the backpack's metal zipper, a strange electricity ran through his body, as if he were about to open not just a forgotten object, but a door to a secret that would change his life forever. But when the zipper finally slid open and the backpack opened, what Jaden found inside was nothing like what he expected. The zipper slid open with a soft metallic sound, but to Jaden it sounded like thunder, echoing in his ears. His heart was pounding, pulsing, as if it were about to leap out of his chest, and his trembling hands struggled to steady themselves as they slowly opened the backpack. For a moment, he expected to find something simple and unremarkable, perhaps forgotten school books or carelessly discarded gym clothes, but what he saw lit his face with a strange, unsettling glow. Inside the backpack was a switched-on cell phone, its screen glowing, emitting a bluish glow that contrasted with the sunset. The device wasn't just unlocked, it was recording video, as if it had been intentionally left there to capture something or someone. The recording time had already exceeded 40 minutes, and as Jaden leaned in to get a better look, he realized the camera was capturing images of nearby streets, parked cars, and even people passing by. It was as if it were part of a clandestine surveillance operation. Beside the cell phone, a battered plastic folder held a stack of papers. The first pages revealed black and white photographs, some with quick notes in red pen, names, dates, and arrows pointing to specific locations. There were familiar faces there. One of the images showed the school bus driver who took Jaden and his classmates to school every day. Another featured a playground attendant, a man who always seemed to be in the background, sweeping the floor or tidying up toys, but who now appeared as part of something larger. Jaden's stomach churned. He flipped through. The pages, not quite comprehending the scale of what he held in his hands, but one thing was clear: this wasn't just a forgotten backpack. It was a piece of a dark puzzle, and somehow it had been left there to be found, or perhaps retrieved by someone who had run late. Swallowing hard, he looked back at his phone. The ambient sound of the recording was on, and distant voices could be heard. They weren't clear dialogue, but fragments of sentences that suggested haste, secrecy, and something that was supposed to happen later that night. The sense of danger grew like a shadow around him. It was no longer just curiosity, it was real fear. Jaden closed the folder, but couldn't take his eyes off his phone screen. He wondered who had left it there, and even more so, why. It all seemed so improbable that for a moment he thought he was living a fantasy created by his own imagination. But the coldness of the images, the handwritten names, and the real-time recording left no room for doubt. It was real, and it was right there in front of him. The boy took a deep breath, trying to think what he should do. His instincts screamed to run to an adult, show them what he'd found, and ask for help. But a deeper voice, perhaps shaped by years of no one believing his observations, told him it would be useless. Who would listen to a boy who had always been ignored and called a storyteller? Doubt paralyzed him, but at the same time, in his mind, something formed with disturbing clarity. He had just stumbled upon evidence of a crime that was still in progress, and if he didn't do something, it might be too late. But when Jaden finally decided to seek help and reveal what he had found, what he received in return was not support, but rather contempt, rejection, and even ridicule. With his backpack clutched tightly to his chest and his heart pounding, Jaden ran toward the school, which was just a few blocks from the playground. The hallway was already nearly empty, lit only by the yellowish lights that flickered from time to time. He found the principal, Mrs. Parker, closing the door to her office. Panting, he grabbed her arm and, unable to form his words, poured out everything he'd seen. He spoke of the cell phone recording, the photos of familiar faces, and the strange notes. His eyes shone with fear and urgency, but the woman's expression didn't reflect the same seriousness. "Jaden, it's late," she sighed, adjusting her glasses. "You need to stop with these stories. Always making things up to get attention." The sentence fell like a blade on him. He tried to insist, opening the backpack in front of her, but the principal only glanced at the papers and slammed the lid shut, handing the backpack back to the boy. "This is no joke, Mrs. Parker." His voice nearly broke. She, however, just shook her head, muttering that she had no time for childish fantasies. Humiliated, Jaden walked through the halls with tears in his eyes. In the courtyard, a group of classmates noticed his distress. When he desperately told them what was inside his backpack, they were met with cruel laughter. "Look at that fake detective," scoffed Marcus, the tallest in the class. "I bet he thinks he's going to be a cop when he grows up." Others echoed in chorus, turning their anguish into a spectacle. Each laugh echoed like a punch, and Jaden felt his throat tighten, wishing at least one person would believe him. But no one reached out. When he got home, still shaken, he tried to tell his mother. Denise, exhausted after a double shift, caressed her son's face and asked him to put away the backpack to return to the police the next day. "Jaden, my love, it must just be someone's trash," she said tenderly, unaware of the gravity of what he was describing. It was at that moment that Jaden realized something painful. He was alone. There was no adult willing to listen, no peers who respected his voice. The full weight of that discovery fell on his small shoulders, and the feeling of helplessness mixed with a silent indignation that grew within him. That night, lying in bed with his backpack beside him, Jaden stared at the dark ceiling. The papers, photos, and recordings seemed to pulse in the room like a nagging presence. reminding him that they couldn't simply be ignored. He knew, deep in his soul, that something terrible was about to happen, and that every minute wasted could cost him dearly. If no one believed him, then there was only one option. He had to act on his own. And so, in the silence of his room, a dangerous decision was born. Jaden would wake up the next day no longer as a simple observer, but as a secret investigator searching for answers, never imagining how deep this mystery would lead him. The next morning, while most children were focused solely on homework or recess games, Jaden woke with a different determination. The sun had barely risen over the red brick buildings of Brooklyn, but his eyes were already open, fixed on the ceiling as if carrying the weight of a choice that could no longer be postponed. He knew he would have no support from adults, not from school, not even from his own mother, too exhausted to see the gravity of the situation. There was only him, an 11-year-old boy, against the silence of something much bigger than he could imagine. With his backpack tucked under his coat, Jaden walked back to the playground. The place looked different this morning. The toys were empty, still covered in dew, and a cold wind swept the leaves across the ground, creating an almost conspiratorial atmosphere. He sat on the slide, took a deep breath, and turned on the phone he'd found inside his backpack. The recording had stopped overnight, but there were several files saved. With trembling fingers, he began to explore each one. The videos showed streets in his own neighborhood, footage taken from inside parked cars, people he knew by sight walking calmly, unaware they were being watched. There were also short, fragmented audio clips in which male voices discussed schedules, targets, and meeting points. Jaden frowned when he realized that one of the conversations directly mentioned the playground, as if it were part of something planned. Filled with a mixture of fear and courage, he decided to write everything down in his sketchbook, transforming the pages previously dedicated to superheroes into makeshift maps. He wrote schedules, drew faces, and scribbled arrows between locations, as if trying to solve a puzzle the adults had overlooked. It was his own investigative diary, and every detail he recorded heightened the feeling that he was dealing with something incredibly dangerous. Over the next few days, Jaden secretly devoted himself to observing behavior. He discreetly followed the bus driver when he passed through the neighborhood outside of school hours. He noticed that the man frequently parked near an abandoned warehouse on the east side. He also noticed how the park attendant, Mr. Keller, lingered in specific areas, looking more at people than at the rides he was supposed to be fixing. One afternoon, while pretending to play, Jaden managed to record Mr. Keller speaking on the phone. He didn't understand every word, but one of them stuck in his mind like a warning. Delivery. That couldn't be a coincidence. Each discovery brought a dilemma. Should he run to the police with the new evidence? Should he press his case again with his mother or a teacher? But the memory of his classmates' laughter and the principal's disbelief weighed heavily, and he concluded that if he spoke again, he would be ridiculed even more. Silence was his only protection, and secrecy his greatest weapon. Gradually, the research became an obsession. Jaden began returning home late, always with poorly crafted excuses. He kept his notes under his mattress and his backpack hidden behind his wardrobe. Each time he opened the papers and looked at the photos, a sense of urgency grew within him. It was as if an invisible clock was counting down the seconds to an event no one else seemed to see. That Friday night, as he was reviewing the audio files, one particular phrase made him freeze. "It's today, at 9, at the warehouse on the east side." His heart raced and a surge of adrenaline coursed through him. That confirmed everything. The plan was underway, and he had only hours before it was too late. Jaden closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and made the riskiest decision of his life. No matter the fear, no matter the loneliness, he would follow these clues to the end, no matter the cost. But what Jaden didn't know yet was that, as he put the first pieces of this puzzle together, he was about to discover something even more disturbing. The truth behind the backpack went far beyond what he could bear. The clock was ticking just after 8 o'clock when Jaden returned to the abandoned warehouse on the east side, the same spot where he'd seen the bus driver park so many times. The neighborhood was silent except for the distant hum of streetlights and the rustling of wind-blown leaves. From his hiding place behind a rusty fence, the boy watched every movement intently, his heart pounding like a drum about to burst. Suddenly, headlights flashed across the street and a black car pulled up in front of the warehouse. Two men quickly got out, carrying boxes that disappeared into the side door. Jaden felt his body freeze when he realized one of them was Mr. Keller, the playground attendant. The figure everyone had seen as harmless now appeared to be involved in something dark and clandestine. He opened his notebook and hurriedly jotted down notes, trying to capture every detail: license plates, time, clothing. As he wrote, he remembered the photos he'd found in his backpack. There were faces of children, some even neighborhood acquaintances, accompanied by dates and locations. The connection began to take shape in his mind like a puzzle finally fitting together. And then came the hardest blow. Among the papers, a photo had caught his eye days before, that of a blonde, light-eyed girl who used to play in the same playground as him. The name written in red next to the image now burned into his memory. As he heard the men talking inside the warehouse, loose words slipped through the crack in the door. Delivery, child, tomorrow morning. Jaden's stomach churned. This wasn't just a plan in progress. It was imminent, and it involved people he knew. His breath became shallow, and the urge to flee was almost uncontrollable, but he knew he had to keep going. If he gave up now, perhaps no one would ever know what was about to happen. Gripping the pencil tightly, he wrote faster, knowing that every second counted. As he watched, another detail made his blood run cold. The school bus driver appeared carrying more boxes, talking quietly to Keller. The man who seemed like just an ordinary worker, responsible for getting children to safety every day, was up to his neck in something criminal. The reality became increasingly cruel. Those the community trusted were precisely the ones conspiring in the shadows. The boy realized he was facing something much bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just surveillance or strange recordings. It was an organized network with people infiltrating the city's daily life, planning and executing actions that could destroy entire families. His legs were shaking, but his mind remained alert. He knew he needed to get out of there before anyone noticed him, but at the same time, he understood that the more evidence he could gather, the greater the chances someone would believe him. He decided to record a few seconds of audio with his own cell phone, capturing voices and mentions of the delivery time. With that done, he slowly retreated into the darkness of the deserted street, trying to control the sound of his breathing so as not to be discovered. With each step, the sense of danger grew, but so did the certainty that he was on the right path. When he finally stepped away from the warehouse, he leaned against a wall and closed his eyes for a moment. The weight of what he had discovered seemed more than he could bear, but there was no turning back. He now knew the entire city was at risk, and that his voice, even if ignored, was the only one capable of preventing a tragedy. But when he realized that his discoveries were becoming too dangerous to remain secret, Jaden had no idea that danger was already approaching, ready to knock on his door. The Brooklyn night seemed heavier than usual. Distant lights flickered, but for Jaden, every shadow loomed large. He walked home quickly, his notebook hidden under his coat, his heart racing, still feeling the chill of the warehouse, the sound of conspiratorial voices, and the disturbing image of men moving boxes like pieces in a contrived game. He was determined to organize his notes and plan his next move, but he didn't realize someone had already noticed his presence. As he crossed the street, he noticed a car parked ahead, engine running, headlights off. Instinctively, he slowed his pace, alert for any movement. A curtain swayed slightly in the early morning breeze, but the rest of the neighborhood remained silent. A chill ran down his spine. He felt watched. He quickly entered the building, took the stairs two at a time, and upon reaching the apartment door, was breathing heavily. Even locking the door, the sense of danger didn't diminish. On the contrary, it seemed more intense with each passing moment. While his mother slept exhausted, Jaden locked himself in his room, reviewing every note and detail about the driver and Mr. Keller. He was trying to plan how to alert the police without being ridiculed when a metallic sound made him freeze. Footsteps echoed down the stairs, slow and precise. He ran to the window. The car was still there, now with the passenger door open. The shot. Coincidence was impossible. They knew. The boy hid his backpack and notebook, lying down, pretending to sleep, as footsteps crept up the hallway. Minutes felt like hours until they ceased, but the silence brought no peace, only the certainty that he was being hunted. In the following days, unfamiliar figures roamed the neighborhood, men on street corners, their eyes too watchful. On the playground, Mr. Keller seemed even more vigilant. One afternoon, upon returning from school, the bus driver approached, opened the door, and smiled unwelcomingly. "You're being too curious, kid," he said, pulling away with the engine roaring. The threat was clear. Now his life was at risk. Jaden ran home, fear mixed with determination. If he doubted himself before, now he knew he couldn't back down. What was at stake wasn't just his safety, but the lives of children who could disappear at any moment. And when he decided not to remain silent, taking his notes to the police, he was preparing to unleash a revelation that would change the entire city. And it was precisely when he decided he wouldn't keep quiet that everything changed. By taking his notes to the police, Jaden was about to trigger a revelation that would shock the entire city. Dawn brought with it a silent tension that seemed to weigh on every corner of the neighborhood. After the night he sensed danger so close, Jaden woke with a determination. He could no longer keep anything to himself. Carrying his notebook and the backpack he'd found in the playground, he made his way to the Brooklyn Central Police Station. His hands were sweaty and his steps were unsteady, but within him was the flame of someone who knew he was facing a truth too great to remain hidden. The police station lobby was cold and impersonal, with the constant sound of phones ringing and officers rushing back and forth. Jaden waited a few minutes until a plainly uniformed officer, tired and unshaven, stopped in front of him. The boy, his voice breaking, asked for his story. The officer initially gave him the same look of disbelief so many adults had given him. But when he opened his backpack and found the papers, photographs, and audio recordings, his expression changed. Suddenly, the atmosphere that had previously ignored their presence became effervescent. The officer's radio burst into rapid orders, communicating with superiors, and other officers approached, all around the table where the documents were spread out. The voices, previously scattered, now carried urgency. "Check the plates. Verify the warehouse address. We need patrol cars immediately." The boy watched in silence, still in disbelief that they were finally taking what he said seriously. For the first time, the eyes that looked at him held no mockery, but respect and concern. The case was no longer a secret. Now it was official. Outside, the streets filled with the unmistakable sound of sirens. Police cars sped off, helicopters were scrambled, and within minutes, the entire city seemed on high alert. Reporters began to surround the police station, receiving reports that a crime in progress had been exposed thanks to the courage of a young boy. Cameras captured the activity, and the name Jaden Brooks began to circulate in whispers. As the unlikely person responsible for uncovering a network many had never suspected existed. However, for Jaden, there was no room for celebration. As the police prepared for action, he couldn't help but think of the phrase recorded in the audio, "Delivery to the warehouse tomorrow morning." He knew that every minute of delay could mean the suffering of innocent children. The officers gathered evidence and gave orders, but for the boy, time seemed to pass faster than they could respond. He took a deep breath, wishing he was wrong, wishing it was all just a figment of his imagination. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. And that night, when the operation finally began, what was at stake was not just the confirmation of their suspicions, but the lives of those desperately awaiting rescue. The operation began shortly after 9 o'clock. The streets of the east side were filled with patrol cars, with their sirens off and headlights off, moving stealthily like predators, approaching silently before an attack. Helicopters hovered in the distance, illuminating the sky with beams of light that hid behind the clouds, ready to descend on their target. The police station was in an uproar, and Jaden, sitting on a bench in the lobby, watched the officers rushing back and forth, preparing vests, weapons, and radios. He was no longer the ignored boy. Now, everything around him was happening because he had spoken out. The operation's destination, the abandoned warehouse where Jaden had seen the men carrying boxes. The boy, though frightened, knew he had to follow, even from afar. He silently made his way to the back of a police car and, unnoticed, climbed into the back seat. His heart was pounding, but the conviction that he needed to see for himself overcame his fear. When they arrived at the scene was even more intense than Jaden had imagined. Police officers surrounded the block, positioning themselves at strategic points, while negotiators communicated by radio. The warehouse doors were ajar, and from inside came the yellowish light of old lamps, along with muffled voices, confirming that there were people inside. Suddenly, the order echoed, "Enter!" The controlled explosion cleared the way, and the rescue team rushed in. Screams mingled with warning shots, heavy footsteps echoed against the concrete, and confusion gripped the place. Jaden, hidden behind a stack of boxes on the side street, trembled at every noise, but kept his eyes fixed on the entrance. Minutes that felt like hours dragged by until the unexpected happened. Children began to be pulled out, running into the arms of police officers and paramedics. Their faces were frightened, their tears were streaming, their breaths shallow, but finally they were free. Jaden felt his legs weaken as he recognized one of them, the blonde girl he'd seen so many times playing on the playground. She was crying now, wrapped in a thermal blanket, but she was alive. Meanwhile, officers handcuffed the men who had orchestrated the crime. The school bus driver was pushed against a wall, arrested despite futile protests. Keller, the playground attendant, was led away in handcuffs, his gaze hard, as if he finally knew his secret had been discovered. The sound of sirens filled the air again, but this time it wasn't a harbinger of fear, but of liberation. Ambulances arrived to take the children to safety, and neighbors began to gather in disbelief at what they saw. The news was spreading fast. A criminal scheme had been dismantled, and the entire town was now calling for justice. From his position, Jaden felt his chest fill with a mixture of relief and awe. He had made this happen. His broken silence, his ignored remarks, all culminated in that night when lives were saved because he refused to give up on seeing what others chose to ignore. Yet even in the face of victory, he couldn't shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. He looked up at the sky, where the helicopter was casting its beam of light over the warehouse, and knew his life would never be the same. But if the operation brought justice and liberation, the next day would reveal a new side to this story. The belated Recognition of a boy who just wanted to be heard. The sun had barely risen when the news spread throughout the city. Newspapers splashed front pages on the scandal that had been uncovered the night before, and reporters gathered outside the police station seeking images of the heroes of the operation. But behind the uniforms and patrol cars lay a detail few knew. None of it would have happened without the quiet courage of an 11-year-old boy. The next morning, Jaden was called to the police station with his mother. Denise walked beside him, still unable to grasp the full extent of what was happening. Her dark circles darkened with fatigue and her expression confused, as if she couldn't believe she was about to see her son recognized. As they entered the lobby, they were surprised by a scene Jaden never imagined. Dozens of police officers stopped their work for a few seconds and began to applaud. The sound echoed off the cold walls of the police station, reverberating in the boy's heart as confirmation of everything he had ever wanted, to be taken seriously. His teary eyes betrayed the emotion he was trying to contain, and his mother, tears streaming down her face, finally understood that her son had never been making anything up. One of the detectives approached, placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, and said in a firm voice, "You saved lives, Jaden. Never forget that." The words echoed like a balm over all the emotional wounds he carried. For years, he had been ignored, discredited, and ridiculed, but now he received the respect and gratitude of an entire city. Yet, even amidst the recognition, Jaden remained with a distant look in his eyes, as if his mind were elsewhere. He wasn't seeking applause or medals. What he wished for most was something simple, that someone had believed in him sooner, when there was still time to avoid so much pain. That morning was filled with hugs, apologies, and promises that his voice would never be ignored again. Denise held him close to her chest and whispered, sobbing, "I should have listened to you, my son. Forgive me." The boy didn't answer, just closed his eyes and let himself be enveloped by the warmth of the embrace. It was the healing he so desperately needed. But within him there remained a seed of unease, the same one that had always accompanied him when he noticed details others overlooked. And perhaps it was this restlessness that, hours later, would make him look at the playground again in a different way. Because, in the silence of a new day, Jaden would return to the place where it all began, and something unexpected would catch his attention again. A few days had passed since the operation that mobilized the entire city. The sirens no longer echoed through the streets. The helicopters no longer streaked the night sky, and for most people, life had returned to normal. But for Jaden Brooks, nothing seemed the same. He walked slowly through the playground, the same setting where it all began, and each rusted swing set, each slide scarred by time, now carried a different weight. They were no longer just toys, they were living reminders of how one simple detail had been enough to change the fate of so many lives. He sat on the swing, gently rocking back and forth, as if searching in the repetitive motion for some answer to the question still echoing in his mind. The children were playing there again, running back and forth as if nothing had happened. But he couldn't look at that place without remembering the voices recorded on his cell phone, the printed photos with names crossed out in red, and the fear that had nearly paralyzed him. Now, however, along with the fear, there was also a certainty. His voice had value. As he watched the sunset-tinged horizon, something unusual caught his eye. Leaning discreetly against the side fence, almost hidden by the shade of a tree, was another backpack. This time, it was red, smaller than the first, but equally out of place. Jaden's heart raced, not from panic, but from a never-failing intuition. The laughter of the children around him seemed distant, muffled, as if the world had once again turned down its volume so he could focus solely on that detail. He got up slowly without attracting attention and walked to the fence. Each step was accompanied by a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. When he finally stood in front of the backpack, he took a deep breath. He didn't touch it immediately, just stood there, staring as recent memory reminded him of what had happened the last time he followed his curiosity. He knew that opening that zipper could mean delving into another secret, perhaps even more dangerous than the last. But he also knew he couldn't simply turn his back and ignore it. The wind blew hard, rustling the dry leaves on the ground, and for a moment the scene seemed frozen, as if the entire universe awaited his choice. Jaden smiled, almost imperceptibly. He was no longer the invisible boy no one listened to. Now he was someone who had learned, through fear and courage, that the truth can be hidden in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes all it takes is a single glance to change everything. He slowly bent down, reached out, and touched the fabric of the red backpack. The weight felt different, but even before he opened it, he knew his story wasn't over. Because as long as there were secrets waiting to be uncovered, as long as there were injustices hidden in the shadows, Jaden Brooks wouldn't stop watching. The imaginary camera slowly closes in on his serious face, his eyes fixed on the backpack as if seeing beyond it, until absolute silence falls. And then the final sentence echoes like a definitive mark. He was just a boy, but he changed the destiny of an entire city. If you were thrilled by this story and want to follow other moving narratives of courage and overcoming, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. This way you won't miss any of the upcoming stories, because there are still many hidden secrets waiting to be revealed.